joining us this afternoon. I'm glad to announce that we are joined by very special guests today, Kathy Tomaszewski and Matt Summers, who are with the MSBA, the Money Service Business Association, and today's presentation will be entitled New Paradigm for Regulators and Industry. For longtime IPA and BPCA members, you guys will recognize the name Kathy Tomaszewski. She was here for a number of years and helped me get acclimated to the industry when I first arrived. So she is a friend, colleague, and an incredible resource, and we're glad she's here today. And she's joined by her colleague, Matt Summers, who is a consultant with CoreCom, and has over 7 years of experience in state money licensing and regulatory affairs, and is a subject matter expert in the state licensing process. So we are glad that both of them are here today. Kathy, Matt have a wonderful presentation. Just to remind everyone, you should feel free to submit your questions through the chat, and we will try to take those as they come along, but if we do not get them during the presentation, we'll do so after today's presentation. And if you have any technical issues, please feel free to also let us know via chat so we can try to address those as quickly as possible. But once again, Matt, Kathy, thank you. The floor is now yours.
Thank you, Brian. It's a pleasure to be here and speak to the IPA. We are, as Brian said, we are complementary. I like to think of us as complementary associations. The Money Service Business Association was established 5 years ago and focuses a lot on the licensed entities. So for prepaid card providers who are required to have money transmission licensing, you are very familiar with the information that is required by the states. The new paradigm that I'll discuss today with the regulators in the industry is one of more cooperation that we have seen recently in striving to become a more efficient 50-state operation. Next slide, please. Today, next slide, Stephanie. Our agenda is an emphasis on the CSBS and NMLS initiatives. The CSBS portion, the Conference of State Banking Supervisors, is more policy driven. We'll talk about the networked supervision as well as other components there. And Matt will talk to us about the NMLS initiatives, which are more the operational components that you'll see and how they affect your businesses. Next slide, please. All right, so first in talking about network supervision, next slide, I felt that it was important to kind of step through a timeline as to how we arrived at this concept and term that's being used at the moment. So I'll step you back to March 2017. In that time period, CSBS launched an initiative called Vision 2020. And that initiative was a drive to harmonization of business requirements, a new system. There was a lot of work going on. As part of that, they also convened a panel of FinTech companies, and there were about 40 companies on that panel. And that panel was started to help them, I feel, arrive at a way to make it more efficient and ease the licensing burden on them. They actually began their initiative prior to the OCC's FinTech charter, although we do believe that when that was issued in the latter part of 2016, the request there, that helped sort of spur the movement to efficiency on. The other component that I think put pressure on CSBS during this time period is in March of 2018, as part of the executive order to look at the regulatory burden, the GAO issued a report there on financial technology in trying to get them to look at satisfying customer needs, but also reducing regulatory burden. So that's where the pressure points came from. In 2019, the FinTech Advisory Panel released a number of recommendations. Some of them were very simple, getting people to all states to use the NMLS system. As many of you who are involved in licensing know, back when we started the association 5 years ago, there was probably only 36 companies that were using it. To run an operation, to do things in multiple ways makes things very burdensome. It adds to your record keeping. A couple of the other recommendations I'll just highlight, there were a number, also were the need for the exemptions. So, you know, if you are going to be have an agent of the payee exemption, it would be nice to know that that exemption, how it's defined in each state and it's handled the same. So those were just some types of samples there. They also, though, at that point in 2019, determined that they could not push forward with the NMLS development effort as they had planned. So that got placed on hold. They were revisiting the vendor, and they revisited their whole approach, which brings us to 2020. So this year, before COVID has taken place, at the end of February, they held their annual NMLS conference. And at that conference, they demoed what's called Kiwi. It's not a fruit. It's called the Key Individual Wizard. And this was a system component that was used in response to one of the large pain points identified by the FinTech Advisory Panel. And they also were rolling out more states for SES, or the state examination system, which was is a tool to help more efficiently examine companies. They then announced network supervision, and that network supervision is essentially the one company, one exam rule. And they determined that MSBs would be the focus of their system initiatives in 2020, thereby reducing sort of the rollout of a comprehensive system to one that's MSB focused. Next page, please. So what is network supervision? I will read it here because I wanted to take the specific definition that CSBS is promoting, so there's not confusion. That's their plan to transform a 50-state system into an inclusive national system using common policies to prioritize work based on risk and resource availability. This will empower a strong, efficient, and assertive state system of financial regulation. Implicit in that definition, of course, is the fact that it will also reduce the calls for federal preemption. Next slide. Some of the benefits that they are touting from a regulator as well as an industry perspective are that a strong network system of state regulation functions efficiently and offers strong consumer protection. So they are trying to drive to the discussion and the importance that states have in terms of protecting their consumers. And they're trying to emphasize that, you know, although it's a networked and we're going to be having similar policies, you're still going to have strong consumer protections. It's more efficient and inclusive in the scheduling process so that, you know, as resources become more and more limited, and I think COVID effect on state budgets is an area that will affect the resources of the regulators. So it's all the more important for them to be efficient. So moving into this networked examination process will give them those efficiencies. They are developed through a core of set of harmonized standards to create multi-state partnerships with examiner pools and shared resources. And the MTRA, the Money Transmitter Regulator Association, they're developing training materials and a certification program for examiners to make sure that the resources are of a similar background and skills. That has been a topic that different states feel that their examinations are more thorough, more comprehensive than others, and you know, has been a slight pain point as to why, you can't push together and have everyone in the same examination pool. Again, it does provide examiner training. And then finally, they do think it's important for the states to realize that they'll have fewer calls for federal preemption of non-bank regulation. Next slide, please. So how is this going to be implemented? So right now, many of the large companies that are on the phone do have multi-state examinations. And there is a multi-state MSB examination task force, MMET, that administers the plans for multi-state examinations. And they will be the force and the organization that will drive and determine the process for this one company, one exam. They are also, as part of the implementation, they are stating that non-multi-state exams are to be limited. Although if you notice, they cannot say they cannot be performed. They don't have that in their directive to be able to do that, but they're strongly encouraging that to limit it. And how it's going to be implemented is the examiner in charge of the multi-state examination process will direct the exam, and they will invite the home state onto the exam. The final thing that I highlighted here for you is that, if you're not participating in these multi-state exams, they are asking states to strive to accept other state exams in lieu of conducting an independent on-site exam, which means that if you're not going to participate in the group, at the very least, you should accept what another state has provided in the exam process. So, we will see how that goes. Next slide. For industry, what does it actually mean for you? So on September 15th, CSBS announced their rollout of one company, one exam. I placed the link of their press release there for your reference. And it's interesting because there are a number of communications that day, CoinDesk, for example, and some of the other international companies that sort of interpreted this rollout of one company, one exam on the supervisory process as a new national license for virtual currency companies, which was not the case. So I just really wanted to highlight that to make sure that there were so many publications that were sort of misrepresenting that topic over those couple of days. So who's included in this? There are 78 companies that have been identified by CSBS that have national licenses. And you're a national licensed entity if you operate in 40 or more states, which I believe most of the prepaid card companies and FinTech companies that are members of the IPA operate in. The list, of course, is not available because they consider it as part of the supervisory process, which is confidential. And you're going to wonder, how am I going to know if I'm selected for the one company, one exam? So if you are selected and on the 2021, you will be notified by the examiner in charge. If you're scheduled for a regular exam in the January-February time period, you should be hearing within the next month that you will be participating in this network supervision, one company, one exam process. If there are problems that are found in the exam, you may be scheduled for an additional exam next year. Currently, exams can take place anywhere from 6 months, every 6 months to 18 months, depending on the results of your previous exam, depending on the risk profile of your company. They may do an every 6-month exam for somebody who is new and is doing, virtual currency, something that they're not that familiar with. So that is forthcoming. The expectation is that the overall supervisory burden that companies are experiencing will be significantly reduced. As part of the pilot program for MSBs, Western Union was one of the companies that piloted the program and helped to work through the different, I'll say, challenges, and found that the process was positive. Of course, as more companies participate in that, I expect that we'll see more revisions take place. The last piece is the state examination system, which is an automated system that's rolling out to assist in sharing of information. Some companies have participated in the pilot. They are actually operational in 10 states at the moment. They have several MSBs that they have audited and examined using the system. They're doing their third release. I think overall feedback is generally positive, but it's in the early stages. I think we've seen that there are more states that are interested in using SES with the fact that they are all been remote in their examinations, and this will be a positive tool for them. Matt's going to talk to it a little bit later, a little bit more detail about that. One thing I'll just note for people here that's interesting is that how you're notified of the examination is through an email from OKTA, and several of our companies that participated in pilots, of course, did not know the source of this email and did not open it because being good business employees and not opening emails from sources where you shouldn't, they didn't, and they were sort of behind the 8 ball because there were first day letters and information requests that they had to respond to. We have strongly encouraged the states to pick up the phone and actually call the company that they will be examining, letting them know that they're using the system so they can actually look to look for the email to set up their credentials. So, if you see that or you hear from your companies about this, it's just sort of an unusual thing there. Next slide. I put for your information there a slide from CSBS. You'll see how the rollout of the states are currently. You'll also notice that there's a complaints pilot rollout there. We won't talk about that today. I would just strongly encourage you to stay on top of that. We are part of a working group on that, and it's an automated tracking tool for complaints pilot. I will say that similar to when CFPB introduced its complaints portal, there are challenges there and misinformation that you don't want to have to respond to, and we're trying to work through some of those industry concerns prior to a full release. But that is also a piece that's being quietly, I'll say, rolled out. Next slide. The other components in the whole networking arena, the next one up is the MSB Multi-State Licensing Agreement. Again, another acronym, MMLA. So this initiative was started in, I think it's like 2018, and about the time that the FinTech Advisory Panel was also looking at improvements and recommendations there. Washington State headed up that initiative, and they headed it up trying to find out how can they get consistent. They pulled together a group of states with their goal to reduce the time to get a license in multiple jurisdictions. They tried to focus on what policies are similar in all of the states, and they had a regulatory cooperation at the heart of the process. Right now, the applications are reviewed by a committee, and a state is set out as the the first state to review the core documents. There are 29 states there, and I think it's a step in the right direction of getting to sort of a national license, but you know, I will put a couple caveats there for you. So informally, we have members and other companies that we've spoken to that have tried to use this process. The process as of November 2019 had 21 agencies issued 146 licenses to 16 companies. So there are a good number of licenses that have been issued, and it is quicker, but companies have found that depending on the number of states that they are trying to get their license in, unless you have the support, you are getting a number of secondary requests at the same time, so that can become overwhelming, and perhaps it's better to do it state by state. So, you know, there are improvements that are being made as we move along the process, but it's not a perfect process just yet. Next slide, please. Which brings us to the final policy change, which is the MSB Model Law. The CSBS started the comments for Model Law back in November 2019. They received several comments, different priorities, I'll say, from the organizations, came out with a secondary document and had comments in March 2020. I think that in order to, their thoughts were in order to actually move ahead and expedite this process, we need to bring regulators and industry together. And so they created the Regulatory Industry Clearinghouse, the RICH group. The MSBA is part of the industry group along with 7 other industry members and 8 regulators. We have been meeting since June and focusing our efforts on the first part of the law, which is the definitions of control and the supervision. At this point, phase 1 of the it's ultimately going to be the CSBS Uniform Money Transmission Modernization Act. The network's licensing and supervision piece have been presented to the various committees, and they are being socialized among the CSBS board. I would expect that it would be released to the broader industry sometime in early October. How the association has been working on it is we have had a small group that represent the different verticals that are covered under money transmission. So we've had representation from our members such as money orders, Memo Financial. We've had Income, which is also your member, representing prepaid cards. We've had business areas, AFEX on board. So we've tried to represent the different product verticals because the speed with which we are defining this is going quickly. The next phase is to define the regulated activities and exemptions. Those are things such as getting to a consistent definition for money, money transmission, virtual currency, stored value cards, making sure that they are, you know, consistent, because as you who track this information know, they are not in all states. And finally, we'll get to the safety and soundness, which will look at the permissible investments. We'll look at surety bond requirements. There was another proposal, an alternative to ensuring safety and soundness with other options other than surety bond. And the goal is to complete it at the end of the year. But since we're heading into October, I think it'll be interesting if we can accomplish that. So those cover the major policy change in this whole world of network supervision and network licensing. The next area is going to be what some of these system changes are and how they how they're incorporating these things in. And Matt Summers from CoreCom is going to send us through those changes. Matt, it's all yours.
Hey, thanks, Kathy. I appreciate it. Hey, everyone. I hope you're having a great day so far. Yeah, like Kathy said, I'm just going to go over a few things related to NMLS, some kind of basic things, but also some new changes, Kiwi and SES. So next slide, please. So first thing, this is more so just a public service announcement, if you will. 2021 renewals will be coming up here November 1st. The checklists are available on NMLS right now. I just went in and looked at some this morning. So I don't know what everyone's usual process is with renewals, but I've always found and strongly encouraged to begin reviewing these checklists as soon as possible. You never know when things are going to change. It's not always the same information every single year you're having to do. And just the process of doing them may be different for each state. So I just recommend going there as soon as possible, and also just gathering those requirements and even uploading those requirements and that information in the NMLS system. Even though the renewals aren't actually due, or you can't even submit them until the 1st, it does not hurt to go ahead and start gathering that information. And by doing that, and also I strongly encourage is the system does open the 1st of November. So you can actually start submitting those the 1st of November. So I would double check with each state to make sure of the deadline to submit renewals. Now, even though your application or your licenses may not expire until the 31st of December, a lot of states encourage that, they have those in on the 1st. Some have the 15th, some have December 1st. So that does vary, but you can find an information on NMLS in the renewal section on the checklist. So I would just reference that to try to get those in as soon as possible. The earlier, the better. Sorry if I sound like a broken record, but that's just kind of what I do emphasize there. So that moves us on to Kiwi, and you heard a little bit about that from Kathy, but that is the Key Individual Wizard Initiative. And basically, I don't know if any of you are familiar with that, but they did release that and some at the NMLS conference this year in February out in San Francisco. So me and Kathy actually were able to sit in on one of the basically an example, some case studies on how to actually use the system. And basically what it was created for is to help alleviate some of the pain points that come along with deciding who's actually considered a control person. I'm sure someone here has probably had an issue with that, depending on what the state is, what the requirement is. And as you know, each state, a lot of them have different interpretations of what the vetting requirements are going to be for those control persons, whether that's fingerprints, just documents they have to sign, certain advanced change notices you may have to give depending on when that change does occur, background checks and just things along those lines. So in the past, the burden has solely been on the companies to review those state requirements, those checklists, and then basically make up your own interpretation of who you want to include on that. And that may be they don't want certain individuals on the applications, or they just do not know who to put on the applications. So the Kiwi system is here to kind of simplify that process and take some of those pain points away. Its main objectives are basically to emphasize individuals their actual functional responsibilities within the company, and not just their job titles and how they may be listed on the management chart. And also create a consistent standard of who needs to be added as a control person, no matter which state you're applying in. So to basically come up with some common ground, depending on where you're applying at, where you're doing business at. And then, more so just helps distinguish which individuals must be vetted, having to do all those fingerprints, and which individuals you just basically need to list and saying they do have some type of responsibility within the company, but they may not warrant actually being vetted. Next slide, please.
Matt, it's Kathy. I would just add in there, I think the other thing with Kiwi, part of that problem was that some of the VCs that are investing in companies, whether they're FinTech companies or even traditional money transmission, they were not sort of management people that needed to be vetted. And I think that was, again, sort of a drive there and sort of helping to discern who was important in the management of the company, and and how much voting rights and control they had over them.
Yeah, 100%, and that really is the tougher one and it's not just listing in control persons. It's these control persons, like the venture capitalists, the ones that aren't involved in the day-to-day, especially in this type of industry. They're located all over the world, and trying to get them to do certain things, and there's headaches there. So if anything that they can do to alleviate having to do that for individuals that aren't needed, I'm sure everyone welcomes that to come along. So thanks for pointing that out, Kathy. And right here on this screen, I've just listed a few business rules that were basically given to us at the last conference in relation to Kiwi. And these are some of the things that they're basically taken into interpretation to help decide exactly who was to be listed as a control person. Now, there's much more of these listed, and these aren't written in stone either. These may be changed whenever this system is actually implemented. But as you can see here, some of these things are relatively basic, but they give more thought and more description of exactly what is needed. Number one here, the highest ranking executive will always be vetted. I think we could all probably agree and understand that that's probably a requirement. Then it goes into the managers of the board, which the highest ranking of the board would be vetted. Now, that may be a gray area currently. I know that some past individuals I've worked with or companies I've worked with, that individual may not have been listed. But I think that at least helps clarify exactly who is going to have to be listed. Same thing with managing members for general partnerships. And then lastly, the natural persons. If there's an active investor with greater than or equal to the lowest ownership threshold, they would also need to be vetted, which I can probably ensure that that's probably across the board, even currently now. So like I said, there's much more of those listed. I just wanted to throw a few out there to everyone to see and start thinking about. So next slide, please. So right here, this is actually a screenshot from the test Kiwi that we used out at the NMLS conference. So what this is actually after you would go in at the beginning of the process of entering in all the key individuals within your company. So what you would do is, we'll take the top one here, the Elizabeth White. And you basically would start, and it will go through and ask you a number of questions about this individual. Obviously their name, their title, any type of ownership, whether they're full or part-time, if they have any type of leadership role within the company, and many other questions to go along with that. And basically you run through, it spits all this information out on this screen. And you can see the check boxes here. She's listed as employee, and she's also in a functional role, and then she is the CISO, which generally that is an individual that would need to be listed by some states, but maybe not some others. So next screen, please. So after you go through the process of entering all this information in, you can see right here, this is kind of the end process for each individual. It pops up, shows the information you gave, and the system generates and spits back out whether they need to be vetted or not. So you can see here, based off of this person's information that was entered, it popped up, and because of their leadership role, their management within the company, they are to be vetted. So they would need to go through those, fingerprint process, background process, depending on what the state requirements are. Now you can see below that, though, the ownership hierarchy. If that was coming into question, they would not need to be vetted there because they don't have any ownership within the company. So you may see some that are flip-flopped here. They don't need to be vetted for leadership because they don't have any day-to-day, but they may be the majority owner of the company. And then you'll see others that are no for both of these. They're just a regular employee, and they have no ownership within the company. So now the business rules that are written to come up with all these, like I said, those are going to change. But I do like the fact that it kind of eliminates the guessing process. Now you may see going forward when using this system that maybe some individuals that you didn't already have in there may need to be added. Now that's going to be more of a headache for companies that are already in the system and having to go back and do certain things. They haven't really addressed how they're going to handle that process yet, but hopefully they have something coming down the road that will give some more explanation of that. It's much easier for companies that are brand new, that are just starting out in the system, and they've never done anything in it yet. So they can kind of start with a clean slate and do everything right from the beginning. So I think that's what it's geared to now, but hopefully that'll be geared to current companies more so as well. So next slide, please. And this is probably one of my favorite parts of the functionality. You can see here, this is the organizational chart. There's also a management chart as well that's made the same way. So when you're going through, when you're entering in the individuals within the company, not just the managers, but also the owners of the company, ask their name, ask their, all their basic info and their percentages, and basically whether they're their hierarchy, whether they are over someone or they're under someone. And once you do all that, the system will actually create your business chart, your organizational chart, and your management chart for you. So this basically, keeps everything uniform. I'm sure I've seen 100 different management organizational charts, and they always look different. They're never done the same exact way. So I think it's just going to give the regulators just more consistency there. And then more than anything too, is for changes, now if you needed to make an update to your management chart or organizational chart, you're having to go back into, however you create it with Visio or just a PDF or Word, and then make those changes, save it, upload it in the system, and then submit it. Now it will just be going into the system itself, typing those changes in, and it will automatically update for you. So definitely a lot of time saved there. Now, some individuals may not make many changes in the system, but some clients, the changes are, there's a lot more turnover. So I just see that being definitely a huge benefit to the system. So next slide, please. So the next topic here is the SES, state examination system. Now, some of you may be familiar with this as well. I'm not sure if you've had the opportunity to test it out at NMLS, or if you've actually received an exam from some of the states that are actually using this system now. So, but if you don't know anything about it, basically it's the SES. It's an end-to-end platform for state regulators and companies to collaborate and to participate in the supervision process. There's a lot of different benefits for it. It simplifies so many things. It gives you one place to go to so that you can actually coordinate back and forth with the regulators. You're not having to email information back and forth, phone calls back and forth. Not that you won't have a phone call with the regulator, but that's just not, the communication process is mainly done through that system. And once it's uploaded in there, it's there. You don't have to constantly keep updating things back and forth and upload multiple documents back and forth. The states are in agreement that are actually in the system to use that same information, to not require you to upload five of the same exact document, which currently, I'm sure you all know if you've gone through the examination process, things can be very redundant and get quite confusing, especially if you have any going on at the same time, which that system is supposed to alleviate that stress as well of concurrent examinations. You can actually see, other regulators can actually see your examination schedule in the system. So if they're doing their due diligence, and they can go in and see, hey, XYZ company has an exam, September 25th. We're not going to go in and require them to do one as well. And more importantly, they could actually use that same examination information that the other state is using if they choose so to do, and if they're in agreement on the information that is required. So just based off that information, I mean, it can make this process much easier. And you're going to see more improvements to it, hopefully, and especially as more and more states decide to use the system. And as Kathy explained earlier, I think maybe even ones that don't actually want to use it, their hand may be kind of forced a little bit now, especially with the way the times are now, with everyone working at home and people not traveling and going to office locations to do on-site exams. I believe you're going to see some of that states push into this just solely because of that issue. So hopefully a combination of the two you'll see more and more states starting to use this system, and which I think is going to be a great benefit. Next slide, please. Yeah, and so you have your SES, you have Kiwi, and you have your renewals. So a lot going on in NMLS right now. There's a lot of things to cover, especially in the renewal process. But if I myself could help you guys out at all, answer any questions when it comes to renewals. If you have any issues or pain points that you need any advice or any help on whatsoever, I'd be more than happy to speak with you on that and send you any more information I can on Kiwi or SES to make anything clear that I did not cover today. So thank y'all.
Next slide. I don't know if we have any questions, Stephanie?
Not at the moment. This is Brian, and I want to thank Matt and Kathy for your presentation. I do have some questions to throw your way. I thought the presentation was very comprehensive, but I do think there's some questions for me that if you can either go into more detail when you covered it during your presentation, or kind of point us in the right direction or how to think about some of these things, I would appreciate it. So my first question up and will be kind of a softball here to get us started. When it comes to federal preemption, who generally makes that request? Is it the covered company, or are you seeing that policymakers on the federal level are asking for more cohesive regulation being applied on the state level?
So I think that it is the federal regulator, and I'll say the OCC, who is driving that discussion in terms of the FinTech charters and looks at new banks. That is sort of is what's pushing against CSBS, and that's who they see as threatening that override.
And then I guess my follow-up is, Kathy, I think you mentioned the complaint portal, and I'll be frank, I was not aware of it in terms, even if it's just a pilot program. I guess the question is, why haven't we heard more about this? Is it because it is just in the pilot program form, or is it's not ready for prime time, or are there some other reasons that I generally have not read or heard anything about a complaint portal on the state level?
So one of the things that I have to say about the state system that's unusual, that really until this recently, we did see some work together, is that I feel like the navigating yourself around the money transmitter regulators, the NMLS, the system component, and then the CSBS, the sort of policy side of it, they are not very integrated until recently. So they sort of would set a policy and then implement something differently, and they in the system, and they're separate. The complaint portal was something that you would only find out if you sort of attended the NMLS system type activity, and a lot of people, of course, don't do that. I consider it we attend, but it's an expensive conference. It's very focused there, so we haven't seen a lot of that. We are part of the association is part of what's called the Industry Development Working Group. And there are a number of companies on that where they do provide information about things like the consumer portal, but they have not published anything. I think they should be publishing some information about it broader, because they're in a pilot mode. It's not in a, just a, development stage any longer. But it is very regulator driven. So comments that industry have made, I will say, are not taken as strongly as we would like them to be at this point. But I'm happy to share the information that we have about it.
No, thank you. I mean, I think at this point, once it gets out of the pilot stage, you may see more or get more interest in that particular piece, because I know when the CFPB came out with their complaint portal, I'm not sure it was ready for prime time, and it had some things that I thought and we collectively thought should have been improved, and they have been along the way. And so as long as that, there is the ability for companies to provide feedback, there's always a better way to think about things and do things. I think it would be helpful.
One thing I will just mention about the rollout that is positive is that at this point, the consumer does not, even in the pilot, the consumer does not access the portal directly, similar to what the CFPB's portal was. They have to call the regulator. So there is some vetting done there. I know from the complaint process from the MSB perspective, a lot of times when we were getting complaints, our companies, they weren't vetted properly. You couldn't identify the consumer. So they're hoping that this test mode before they release direct access to the consumers will help, alleviate any problems they might have.
Yeah, and I'll add one thing. Just there is it's on a Thursday, October 8th. There is a live webinar that they're going to be giving CSBS on the actual complaints portal. It's a free webinar, so I'd be more than happy to send that link if anyone would like to register and attend that as well.
Matt, if you could send that to us, we'll share that with our members. That would be helpful. Thank you.
I definitely will.
And this goes back to this questions. My last question is for Matt and Kathy. And you talked about I guess there's the work being done on a model law. Can you talk a little bit about what the expectations are for the various states to adopt this model law and some of the challenges that might be involved?
So, yes, a little bit. One of the things that has me hopeful, I'll step back. There currently exists a out of the Uniform Law Commission, a money transmission law. It is only adopted by 8 states. Some states have some components of it. The thought was that this push as part of their Vision 2020 in this uniform law would be something that all states could do. They feel that by having industry and regulators in the room sort of discussing it and creating it, as opposed to efforts before where regulators just created something and industry responded to, that they'll have a more positive buy-in with the collaboration. The second piece is that they are finally tying the policy pieces to the system. So when Matt was walking through the Kiwi process and how they're vetting and that's tied to the definitions of in the law itself. So they're a lot closer, they're not being done in isolation of each other. And then finally, what they're doing is they are developing an implementation plan. So CSBS will be taking part in helping states to implement what they need to do, which is different than what they've had before. And industry has committed to support them legislatively. So I'll just say that, for example, the last 2 years, we've helped South Dakota implement changes in their law. One was they had to make a legislative change so that they could use the NMLS system. And then the other thing that they did was we eliminated state fingerprints. So, once they got on the NMLS system, they have the FBI fingerprints, that should be sufficient. We were able to, their legislature is very pro-business. So by communicating with the right committees that this was good for business, they were able to pass that and move forward. That's the type of approach that they are anticipating taking with this uniform law, with the states, sort of partnering with industry to push that forward. And they haven't done that before in any of, action. So hopefully that will help move this law forward.
Thank you, guys. I will take just a quick pause to see if anyone in attendance has a question. Doesn't look like it at the moment. Kathy, Matt, I do want to thank you for your time today. We are pushing up at the top of the hour, but I do want to ask you if anyone has any questions, and I see your emails there, they can send them to you directly or they can email them to me and I will pass them along on your behalf. But I do want to thank our guests. And again, Kathy is a longtime expert who has been a personal friend and colleague, and Matt, with his expertise, is in a great position to help everyone here. So if there is a question that you have for them, feel free to reach out to them directly. We will definitely invite them back. Hopefully you're available early next year to come back, and we can kind of catch up on everything that we talked about today. But in the meantime, please stay safe, and we hope to talk to you guys soon. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, everyone.
Have a great day. Okay, thank you all.